Welcome, Reanimated fans. This is H.A. Conrad coming to you from Brooklyn. On the West Coast, we have Stuart Tiffin, my intrepid co-host, as well as a special guest star. Kyle Diaz is joining us today. Friends of the show may remember him from way back, but really happy to have him on the pod today.
I think the last time Kyle was on the show was when we were talking about The Strain season 1. So if that gives that dates it a little bit.
Yeah, neither of you had children then, right?
No, I think I did.
I'm teasing.
You may also remember me. I was going to say that you may also remember me from an episode from a movie called Pontypool, but I can't even remember the movie Pontypool, so I can't imagine that anyone listening would remember me talking about Pontypool.
I remember Pontypool. It was excellent. But in any case, we're not really getting into news today because there's also a bit of a dearth of it, but we have a little bit extra happening today. We're going to talk about the What If Marvel zombie episode, and then we're also going to be talking about Ashin of the North. So a lot to fit in, but really excited to chat with you all, and thank you for your patience because of my bananas work schedule. Appreciate it. So let's hop in. So Stuart, do you want to take it away?
So yeah, with pleasure. So Disney's Marvel's What If has been one of the only things I feel like that's coming out on Disney Plus right now. It's kind of what's making it worthwhile paying for that extra service. And I think this is the 5th episode that they've released. And each one is its own little bottle episode of like a splinter of the multiverse. And literally, what if this happened instead? And so they've done things like Doctor Strange made different decisions about the Time Stone. T'Challa was actually Star-Lord, etc. And then in this one, the conceit, I think, is like a little bit comically brief. They just said, "What if zombies?" And I guess there's a bit of a joke there that it didn't take much to convince the writers' room that they could go for a zombie episode. And so that's kind of where we end up. It's a Hank Pym derived zombie virus, or at least he tries to go find his wife, and she's infected with something, and then they bring it back. And the story is told from the perspective of Bruce Banner, or for part of the episode anyway.
But I should also point, we talked a little bit about this before, that there were, graphic novels about the zombie theme, and, we have the multiverse and things going on. And a lot of people were making, pretty, negative assessments that they weren't going to go as dark as they did in the graphic novel storyline. And I would say that some of these storylines are pretty dark, especially for the MCU and what we've been seeing, at least, in general. There's been a lot of reality, but these are pretty dark, if you ask me. But
this is when the Captain America and the train scene happened.
Yeah.
That was in the trailer for What If. I was watching that with my 7-year-old, and he was like, "What? This is the Disney Channel. What's happening?"
Right,
He's terrified.
Right. And so I definitely think it's pretty dark. I will also point, I think that the animation is amazing looking. I really am enjoying that part of it tremendously. It looks incredible to me. Kyle, did you get to watch it, and what are you thinking?
I've only seen a couple of the other episodes of the What If series so far, and I kind of love that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is just following the comic books and just totally disappearing up its own, like it's just marvelous to me that we now have a series that's like, hey, all those movies that we wrote, what if we wrote them like slightly differently or something? Like, it's just the meta-ness of it is just really charming in its own weird way, that they think that people are so desperate for Marvel content that we'll watch essentially like remixes, and yet we totally will. So I guess they're right.
Definitely will.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, one of the things I was impressed by, in addition to the animation, was the writing. I thought was like super solid. The characterization, in terms of like the humor that they bring in despite the bleak content in the storyline, I thought was very well done and in line with the things that we've seen. And it's animation, but it's still carrying on those characters, and it didn't feel foreign in that way. It didn't feel like it was its own thing. It actually, to me, did feel like a continuation of the things that they'd put together,
And
which
one
is
of the
really hard
strongest
to
parts
do.
about this series so far has been the voice acting. They're managing to bring back so many of the original cast, right? I mean, like there's one or two exceptions, like
I think
Hawkeye.
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man is also, yeah, he's not voiced by the original, but and neither is Captain America.
Right.
And in previous episodes, Hawkeye was voiced by someone who doesn't sound anything like Jeremy Renner. But that's a pretty cool through line. And in fact, you know, it's a freaking Chadwick Boseman voicing T'Challa, and that's just like kind of pulls at your heartstrings a lot,
gosh,
right?
I know. I heard his voice and I was like, it was really sad.
I guess
But
I'll disagree with you just a little in that I thought this one in particular was a little tonally all over the place, and kind of I guess I'm just too used to the stakes being lower because I found it a little bit unpleasantly grim, and the humor kind of shoehorned in there. So it felt like a very, very bleak episode with some like random jokes kind of tossed in. And it just kind of ping ponged back and forth a little bit. The only time that I laughed really hard was when giant wasp like was holding onto the jet, and then they get away and she just picks up
Yeah,
some zombie and chucks it
that
like
was
so
funny.
far, and it bounces off the back of the plane.
That was
um
funny.
that was actually my favorite moment of the episode, but I thought it was just kind of like a little bit too unrelentingly like, hey, all of your favorite people are quickly becoming undead.
Yeah, I feel like they tried to address that with Spider-Man, or yeah, with
yeah,
Spider-Man's dialogue,
Mhm.
but then also when Sharon Carter gets blown up by the Wasp, and then she's just like, "Oh, I've got Sharon Carter all over me," and it's just like, dude, she was your friend like 30 seconds ago. What do you?
It's between
I
it's
feel
like
like you
literally
two I
between
feel like you
like
two haven't watched enough zombie films to like
Uh,
I mean, seriously, that's exactly what they're doing here. They made it a zombie
yeah,
film
but they're
and they
making
are
a joke
intending.
about it's the comedic out. They were trying to shoehorn, as Kyle said, a
I don't know.
laugh into like, yeah, now my dead friend is on me. You know, I don't
it's literally between my dead friend is on me and I'm infected and gonna die too. It was
know.
like two extremely emotional moments with like a little gore joke in between.
Maybe I'm just in a weird place right now, but which is totally possible.
But I 100% agree also that the zombie thrown at the quad jet was the best part of the
That was
entire episode.
amazing. That
That
was
was
really
great.
great.
I may also have a little bit of history playing in here because when I was a kid, I didn't read a lot of comic books, but I did like Spider-Man. And most of the Spider-Man comic books that I read were like, relatively light, kind of just
Right.
story of the week things. And then one day I was at the bookstore and my grandparents let me choose a comic book and I took home. The details of it are really fuzzy, but Spider-Man dies and goes to purgatory
Oh boy.
and meets like Uncle Ben and you know f- people that he's known throughout his life, and then has to make some sort of decision about whether to stay in hell or come back to the realm of the living. And I think it's all in the end revealed to be Mysterio or something, who's like playing a trick on him and putting him through a test. But it was so uh, uh like scarring of a literature to read,
Hmm.
and so different from every other Spider-Man comic book that I'd ever read, that it pretty much like put me off the whole medium for like 5 years. And so this kind of had a similar feel to it to me, so maybe it just was like bringing back some of those unpleasant memories.
Well, I mean, I also think that generally with the MCU universe, we're used to at least some bit of hope, and typically they like wrap that up at the end, and they definitely did not do that here. And as I understand it from what Stuart just said, the um, Doctor Strange uh, episode was also pretty bleak. So I think that this is, and if you, a lot of the what ifs are like that. And if you read the multiverse, like comics, they kind of do that. And I admit I was a little surprised to see that Disney was even going down this path because it's kind of hard not to be bleak with some of the storylines.
I mean, look at their other forays into zombies, right? That
Right.
ridiculous musical show that I don't think any of us have ever seen, but It is not this. They're not willing to go to these depths, but Marvel is, and kudos.
Do you think that this was one of the possible futures that Doctor Strange looked at in his little like, shifty moment on that planet? Like, did he just look at this one and be like, "Whoa, fuck this, I'm out of here"? Like,
Probably. And also, there's the whole Watcher piece, which I'm assuming they're trying to tie in from the Loki, like that. Maybe there's something there that we'll see at the end with all of these, because he seems to be the narrator, and he mentions very similarly to Doctor Strange all the different things that he was watching. Sorry for spoilers, anybody. But he has a similar line actually to Doctor Strange. So I was wondering if they are going to try to do something with that, and that it ends up that this is more like his series versus Loki or whatever. But I don't know, it is a very bleak thing to be watching right now.
Yeah, it has some bleakness to it. I would also want to point out the cast, or the cast of extras or whatever that they kind of assembled, the survivors of the zombie apocalypse. It's a lot of like C and D list Marvel people, like Happy, the chauffeur, and there's even a joke, and that's voiced by Jon Favreau. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. You got your Winter Soldier, Sharon Carter, they are definitely lining up to be a central piece of at least the TV version of Marvel, right? She featured quite heavily in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. General Okoye, who is Denai Guerrera. It was an interesting selection. The people that they decided to have be survivors, sort of.
It actually reminded me a little bit when it was surprising to me as well, and it was like, did they decide on this because of the people that they could get for the voice acting, or was this sort of the idea all along, was that it was going to be sort of like different, like very specific and different cast members that you wouldn't expect, to give them a little bit of time on the screen or in the storyline, and that it isn't the people that you would expect to survive, because that's also true. I mean, are they the equivalent of like Ash or Shaun of the Dead? The like the whole joke that it's always sort of like some electronic store manager that saves the day.
I mean, Cap's bite scene, like when he gets off the Quinjet or whatever, and then it's a tiny Hank Pym giving him a tiny zombie bite. Like, that's kind of genius. I don't know if that's a direct link to the comics, but can you imagine? There's nothing much more terrifying than that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I thought that was, I wasn't bothered by it, but I agree. I thought it was kind of interesting to see who they chose to kind of carry this on. So
Scott Lang's Head in a Jar gave me strong Mars Attacks vibes, which was also a movie that I found really traumatizing as a kid. So maybe we're
also
just
a little Futurama, right? Too.
Oh yeah, a little Futurama. And I will say, we haven't touched on him yet, but Vision and Wanda continue to be like the tragic pair of the Marvel MCU. That was the most moving subplot of the episode to me.
I was kind of like, they never get to be happy. No matter what universe, it doesn't seem like they get to be happy.
That's rough.
It's like the younger sister in Downton Abbey. She's never allowed to be happy. So they're like the tragic romantic couple of this universe.
Strong Downton Abbey pull for our zombie podcast, but
hey, I got to do it. I got to call it as I see it.
So I'm sure we're missing some valuable other insights here, but anybody have anything else that was like a real standout from this episode? I did like seeing Thanos's crew get owned at the beginning of the episode. I forget those people's names. They all of them have like dark undertows kind of names, and I don't remember what they are. And then
Crescent Maw.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's a scene of Thanos at the very end. Apparently he showed up anyway after his two top dudes were taken care of, and he still has the Infinity Gauntlet. And I will say, one of the issues that I had with this entire episode was that people still could use technology and magic, like innate skills, like Wolverine, I would understand. But when it's like Doctor Strange and Wong doing magical spells as zombies, I mean, maybe I'm just being like a zombie purist and I should sit down, but I do take a bit of umbrage with that.
Well, and I also was like bothered by the fact that Thanos even cares, because isn't this kind of the end of the? I don't know. Why would he even care at this point? He's a zombie, right? So that would felt a little strange that they would be carrying on plans or
Mm.
whatever. Especially a plan of that magnitude seemed a little strange. Maybe he could sort of, I don't know, tangentially do use some of his powers, but I don't know that planning would be one of them, right? Even unless they're trying to imply that that was just sort of this, instinct or urge that he had. But I also felt like that was a little weird that they could use something as complicated as the spells and the magic and the things like that they had gained. And I mean, like the flying piece, that was fine, or anything that was like maybe could go off sort of, but even when they had happy turns and he's using the gauntlet,
Hmm.
the Iron Man gauntlet, like didn't seem like that takes a lot of coordination, right?
And
Seemed a little weird.
Hawkeye's like fully himself. It seems like
Right.
he's
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 just
using
flying
different kinds of
around.
arrowheads.
Yeah.
No,
So,
You're thinking of Falcon, but yeah, Falcon's also using
oh, sorry.
complex tools.
Falcon. But Hawkeye's like still dead on with his
Hmm.
arrows. That doesn't seem likely, right? So I don't know. Yeah, I agree. I thought that was weird. I also was very bothered by the fact that Sharon didn't shrink herself before she became a menace as a giant zombie.
Yeah,
I mean, it feels like she could have done that in the last instant or something, but she
yeah.
didn't. Then we wouldn't have her throwing that zombie, so I guess that's the point. But
We needed her to throw that zombie.
didn't need the
I do wonder what kind of conversations happened. You know that they must have been like Stuart, you were mentioning your son saw just the preview for this. They must have been like really just turning that dial on the gore level. Like what is acceptable on Disney Plus as a Marvel property and what isn't? Because like there was some stuff that was like a little bit horrifying, like oh, I'm sorry, what's his name? The Wong getting his head chopped off with the portal.
Hmm.
But then the zombies were also like extremely cartoonish looking zombies. So it was very
Mm.
clear, like, hey, this is not Captain America. He's like he's hunched, he's got like limbs hanging off, his
Hmm.
face is all distorted. Like, I just really wonder, like, that must have been a constant conversation of just like where can we take this to, and then what is actually beyond the realm of acceptable for the franchise we're in.
I
I
imagine
did.
there was a part of that conversation that was also nobody touches Spider-Man. He's
Yeah.
gonna be fine.
Yeah, but Kyle, I agree with you. Like I felt like some of those decisions were deliberate to make them look so cartoonish, so that there wasn't any question that this was almost like a different world entirely, so that it could be dissociated. Oh, that's just this, you know, random little spin-off thing, right? So that you could
Yeah.
have that conversation with kids. I mean, I don't I do you remember like when the whole snap thing happened, the trauma that caused to children
Oh,
who went to see it in the movie theaters, and maybe they
Yes,
were,
I remember all the trauma to children that
and
the snap
adults too, and
caused. Yeah.
adults too, but they did, I don't know,
Mr.
like they did
Stark. Mr.
they did a
Stark.
compilation of like interviews with kids after they saw that, and parents were like really upset because it's like, everybody was traumatized by the snap, but this was just, I felt like they deliberately went sort of further into, I don't want to say caricature, but like more cartoonish, so that, all right, that's definitely not Captain America, like, so that it could be somehow explained, you know sort of like this is a very different world, like a dream world, basically. So, so good point.
And eventually this will be one of, I don't know how many episodes of this they're going to do, but it will be its own thing, its own, like we said, it's in a bottle. And it won't, no more than any of the other episodes. Like honestly, Doctor Strange one was extremely bleak, much more bleak than this, frankly. But it's also just that's the multiverse. You can destroy. You have the capacity for much more widespread destruction and sadness. And I think they are doing a good job of plumbing those depths in this series. But it would be nice to have some like rainbows and butterflies too, maybe just to balance it out.
I don't know. Maybe it's also that, with Tony Stark's death, and in the MCU universe, and Iron Man's death, maybe they were like, well, it could have been much worse. This is
This will
what
show
could
you.
have happened. Like, I know you all were traumatized by that, but look what could have happened.
Wait and see what else we can do.
Right.
So I think that we've talked this out. This is good. Should we move on to the second part of our episode today?
Sure.
Kyle, do you want to give us a bit of your background with the show Kingdom from Netflix?
Sure. So I thought that I had watched all of the first season of Kingdom, but I was surprised when I looked at my Netflix history that I actually watched like the first 4 episodes of the first season. So that's my next task after now watching Ashin of the North, is to go finish that up and check out season 2. It was one of those shows that I like really, it grabbed me and I enjoyed, and then like something happened, like something else big came out, or like I don't know exactly what the the distraction was, but I just kind of left it and never came back to it. So I was pleasantly surprised to have a reason to revisit that world again. But I remembered enjoying the show, but I'm coming to this with kind of no background of the second season, or even kind of a sense of what the completed story is. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Kingdom universe.
Okay, so then Ashin is a prequel, and I thought it was a movie, but it's described everywhere else as just a special episode, the 13th episode of Kingdom. So in only seeing the first 4, you've got 2 more to go, I guess. I don't think that that's what's beautiful about Ashin, is you don't really have to have seen Kingdom to get it. I mean, there's a bit of a, oh, I know it's coming sort of feeling, but they really in Ashin have a kind of a gentle approach to their zombies. They tease them out. Their introduction comes quite late in the story. And really the characters, as far as characters go, there's 1 or 2 who we've seen before in Kingdom, and 1 in season 1, 1 in season 2. And that is, also, we need to give our regular Kingdom disclaimer that we can't pronounce Korean names. So very sorry.
We'll do our best though.
Of the antagonistic Cho Hae-won clan, you've got, what's his name? Cho Byam-il is in Ashin of the North, and he is the royal commander of the guards who gets killed in season 1 of Kingdom. I don't know if you guys recall, he was the one who was in charge of a bunch of dudes who were chasing down the crown prince so that they could bring him back to the capital and probably kill him.
Yep.
And then the other character who is in here. Oh, there's 2. There's the Dr. Lee, who's the king's royal physician, but he comes in way at the end of the episode. Yep. And Min Chi Rock, who I didn't realize was actually in season 2, but he is the commander he's in charge of the royal commandery and has a fairly significant role in season 2. And he's a very significant character in this project. And otherwise, it's kind of all new people, and that's what's kind of great about it. To watch it a little bit, if you're not totally caught up on Kingdom, you can totally get away with that.
Well, and it also gives, like, you can get away with it, but if you are watching or have watched the other seasons, it gives some context to some of the things that we saw happen. So that's kind of nice too. And a little bit more of sort of the whys of why this whole thing sort of got kicked off. But it's definitely like sort of like a classic revenge tale, betrayal, revenge, all of that. I think that the main actor who plays Ashin, Gianna June, is really, really good. And as the adult Ashin, there's also a child actor who plays her in the beginning. But she really, it's like, it really just takes her down to sort of like the bare bones, like very, very sort of classic tale of somebody that's been completely wrecked, has a lot of things going on. She has some guilt going on, but she also really wants to avenge her father's death, who she feels, and she's correct, has been mistreated and was betrayed, though she doesn't even understand to what level he was betrayed until much further in. but she really, the woman who played like Gianna June, I think does a fantastic job, and also the transition from her as a child to an adult I thought was great too.
Oh, that scene is worth a conversation just in itself. Like
Yeah,
they
yeah.
do the aging up and training montage in kind of a different way, I feel like, in this product.
It was phenomenal. The performance by both young and
Yep.
grown Ashen actresses is incredible, and that kind of montage of them aging into each other was super well. It was so subtle that I was like, wow, I totally believe that we just watched somebody totally grow up. I thought it was really, really well done.
Yeah.
Right. And in addition to her personal story, there is also the larger story. And as we would expect from this particular franchise, also talking about the geopolitical issues and the treatment of different people. You know, like you have the main village that Ashen is coming from, is definitely in poverty and looking for some kind of acknowledgement, and that's part of why her father has agreed to do some of the things he's done, is because he has been potentially promised like an appointment, but also they want to be recognized as legitimate, their town or whatever, and so he takes a lot of risks in order to get that, not for him but for his family and for the whole village. And so
There's a lot of layers here of, or at least one layer of metaphor here of these people who are ethnically Jurchen, but geographically Joseon, if Joseon was willing to give him that appointment to the government. But so yeah, there's a, yeah, as with anything that these guys are doing. I saw one thing on Reddit that was like, Kingdom is basically just a metaphor for COVID and how the United States has been handling it, which I thought was kind of hilarious. But there's always with any kind of Korean zombie project, you can always just start feeling those bits of metaphor kind of poking around the edges. It's kind of fun.
Right.
I would also say that, like, just to take a brief tangent here, like even just the opening crawl of this movie, like the kind of the opening introductory like text that flashes on the screen, it, like, set me on a Wikipedia spiral of trying to figure out who all these different factions are and what they're doing. That filled me with so much anger about the kind of like Eurocentric education that I had, because I'm like, I don't know anything at all about Korean history. And the Joseon Empire, as I learned yesterday, so I'm not like some great scholar on it or anything, it lasted for like 600 years and was super important to the development of that whole region geopolitically. And it's like, how much time do we spend on the Ottoman Empire, which had essentially the same territory and lifespan? And then this just like it really was just like, wow, there's whole just huge segments of not even distant world history that I'm totally clueless about. So it gave me a lot of kind of anger about how my whole education and focus was raised. And you don't have to understand truly everything that goes on here, but it did add a little bit of enrichment to the story to just do that initial kind of research, because there are a lot of different factions and motivations and things like that happening throughout this story that it's really quite difficult to keep a grasp on.
Well, we had a similar experience when we first started watching Kingdom, and you can go down that rabbit hole, and it's dense history, and it's so interesting. And agree, Kyle, like I didn't know any of it. And then to get really into the nitty gritty of some of these stories, it's just kind of just not even having even a hint of the knowledge of it, right? Felt like it was a part that should have been talked about at least to some extent, but I feel like in general education kind of overlooks a lot of this, and or at least doesn't touch upon it. And it is the same, I had the same experience where I was like, oh, I guess I have to read all this before actually watching this episode, just from the initial sort of like how they were trying to set the table. And I'm like, wait, I need more. But it's fascinating. And the fact that it was such a, like, it was a dynasty basically. And so that was kind of sobering, honestly, to realize how much I don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say that it was, to the uninitiated, which is our culture's fault, as Kyle's pointed out. It was a complex beginning to this episode because they're like, okay, you're in northern Joseon, and across the border are 10,000 Jurchens, and they can't be defeated. But inside Korea, then there's other Jurchens, and that's where our story begins. And you're already, my head was spinning a little bit, just like, okay, where are the Jurchens, and which Jurchens
And
am I
which
supposed to care
Jurchens
about?
are these?
Yeah, so
And we have that context for our own history, so that
yes,
when we set a when someone sets a Western like inside the Mexican territories in like 1810 or something, you kind of understand like, okay, so there's like Americans, but they're still over there. And then like Spain controls this part. And like we kind of have that like grasp of our own history, which it can also be quite complex. Um, but just totally did not have it for
no,
this part of the world in this time period.
lacking a lot of context. But once the story begins, it basically, I think it becomes fairly clear, and you're able to follow, because it's mostly just about Ashin's personal story. Her father's relationship to the Jurchens across the river is a little bit more complicated, but he basically explains it in very simple terms because he's talking to her. She's a child, so you get the sense of why he is doing the things he's doing, even though that first scene of him, he's a butcher and he's getting treated very poorly by what we assume is a fancy Joseon lady. She spits at him, even, like, it's gross. And then he picks up the floor meat that she has thrown on the floor and says to the rest of his neighbors, like, looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. I mean, I don't think that was supposed to be comedic, but I was like, this is. Sure. I'm sure the hygiene standards are lower back in those days.
I think it was supposed to be a little comedic, but also it was like he just butchered the animal.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's now just touching the meat that he had just butchered is kind of weird, and that she was that upset about it. But it's okay enough for her to come and get it from him. And I did think that the setup in terms of just showing the poverty and showing that even this like hunk of meat meant that this entire village got to eat was a really just an excellent little storytelling device.
There's a little parallel there to season 1, right? Because they basically find some meat in the form of Danny, I think, the dead medical student, and make a stew. And here we have almost a complete similar shot of these happy villagers eating this new stew of deer meat. And I'm trying to remember if we'd already seen if the deer scene had already happened. Yeah, it had.
It opened with the deer scene.
Yeah, and so we were already a little bit sketchy about deer.
I was filled with dread. I was like, oh God, please, nobody on this show ever eat any soup, because like I just have flashbacks. I thought we were coming right out of the gate with this whole village getting zombified. It turns out that would happen a little bit later.
I was also impressed with, again, and this has been the same across the whole series, but the costuming, just showing the sort of level of survival that it must, that survival instincts it must take for this little village to kind of carve out an existence, just in their. They did an incredible job with makeup and with muck, honestly, with mud and just, and then showing the costuming and Ashin especially all throughout this whole movie, it like what they're showing her go through just to like that it's really a struggle, and even before she gets there, this is her existence in the village, and everybody's like it's a really difficult time to live, basically, and to show that poverty. I just think that they did an excellent job at setting this stage. And again, there were the hats, but those come later.
So those hats.
I agree that the production values were phenomenal across all layers of filmmaking, with one huge exception. And I'm curious if you guys thought this as well.
Go on.
Was there anything that stuck out to you as being like, boy, that was really poorly done?
I mean, I knew that the CG animals were CG, but I did also recognize that they were good CG.
Yeah,
I thought they were.
I totally disagree. I thought the animals were terrible
CG.
CG. They moved totally wrong, especially the deer. Like even before it gets zombified, I was looking at that deer and I was like, that deer is not walking like a deer. it is walking already like some sort of predator animal. So I thought that the creature CG was pretty for they were trying to do some really ambitious, like, Life of Pi level stuff. But I still was like, boy, this is rough.
I mean, the tiger was okay because they didn't show too much of it most of the time.
Yeah.
And I would say that my threshold, my barrier for deer CG was created by Walking Dead in that one circus scene where Rick sees a super fake deer. I don't know, HA, you might remember this one. We certainly made fun of it on the podcast. And Kyle, you might have stopped watching Walking Dead by the time.
Yeah, that does not ring a bell for me.
It was such a bad CG deer.
It was really bad.
This, by
this
comparison,
is reminiscent. This is definitely reminiscent of that. And I agree with you, Kyle. But I also was I forgave it a little bit because I was like, if you have more money to put into hats, I'm on board. Like, you don't put in CG, you just put it into the hats.
I guess I'm also happy that they didn't trim that for budgetary reasons. Like, I guess it would have been easy to look at this script and say, oh, we can't do this, so let's cut back on the like animal portion of this. But I thought that it kind of drove home how close to the wilderness this village truly is, to have such like a interplay with the natural environment and the creatures that live in the forest and occasionally hunt the people in the forest. So I didn't have a problem with it from a story perspective, and I'm glad it was there. But it was like, oof, that's a rough animal right there.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, they tried to hide as much as they could, like doing the sort of very quick edits and shots and in the dark for them, in the forest and whatever. But I feel like the deer was the most glaring, horrible piece of that. The tiger was
horrible. I think is okay. I mean, you guys, you're welcome to your opinions, of course. I didn't like.
It looked like the uncanny valley was just there full. It just was not moving, as Kyle said. I don't think it was moving well, and it was already like, oh, this is a creepy little deer before it even ate the stuff.
It was always a creepy little deer, that's for sure.
But I do, the one bit of storytelling where I was like a little, I don't know, and it fills in a little bit later, is that, the story that they have put out about the tiger sort of being the cause of the deaths of the wild ginseng gatherers. A tiger does it does show itself. It is a freaky deaky tiger, and yet this group, like, that they're like, we'll still avenge, even though they've been confronted with this extraordinarily bizarre thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the only sort of bit of storytelling I was a little uncomfortable with.
They were so stuck on their revenge story that they couldn't justify a zombie tiger. Like, that was just, and I kind of get that. Like,
I guess that was the one piece where I was like, but anyway, but overall, I thought that the production value was great. And I can forgive that. I just think that, especially the budget that they have expended. And also, I mean, the other part of this is that kind of animation takes so long that maybe they cut some corners. That may also have been part of it as well, just to get this out there, because it already had been, I mean, COVID had caused a lot of delays in general for other things. And maybe that was a piece of this too. I don't know for sure, but that seemed to be potentially an issue too. And they were just like, oh, let's just, we'll just do this, and good enough for government work.
So can I ask, and I know we got to get back to the plot, but what are the mechanics of the zombies in this world? Because, okay, there's like some sort of parasite on the leaves that the deer eats, and that must be how it moves between, but it doesn't appear to be spread by bites, because lots of people got bitten either by zombies or by animals and did not become zombies.
That is actually worthwhile pointing out. In the military camp, the big zombie scene of this episode / movie, there are a lot of bodies on the floor when Ashin is done doing her dirty work that aren't reanimating. And I do think that's, and it's not like she's shot all of them. So I would agree. However, it is in those little white egg sacs on the bottom of the leaf, there are worms. And the worms are what are transmitted by bite, I think. But also they don't necessarily reanimate right away. And so it's basically like the strain
at some point.
Yeah, it's a couple hours. So either you put the leaves in there, and I guess the worms have infiltrated the leaves enough to do it, or it's just we've definitely seen bites be a thing before for transmission, but I think maybe it's a little bit wishy-washy on how they want to tell the story at the time.
Yeah, I think they sometimes try, and she said a little bit something about the nervous system, and so they kind of they walk that line, they blur that line quite a bit. But I think the idea is that somehow the nervous system has to be intact, and if there's too much gone, they won't reanimate. But they definitely kind of jump back and forth between like almost instant reanimation and not. So there is that. It's definitely they don't always stick by the things that they've set up. And then there's the whole water piece with the worms too, where you can, you know, drown somebody.
So can we talk a little bit about the tiger hunt? That scene. I know we don't have to go through every part of the plot, but I think that's like a really good early scene before when Ashin basically is still a little girl. I like the setup for the scene. You've got they're doing it for like theater. They don't really want to catch a tiger. This is all just to get the Jurchens across the river to not be mad at the Joseons is kind of what they're doing, because they've already deduced also that it was a Cho Hae-won D-bag who murdered them all, right? Like, so they're trying to, that's your nod to Cho Hae-won clan being jerks all the time. But I thought that the scene was a lot of fun. You've got all the peasants banging their pots and pans and everything's going great. Until the tiger decides not to act like a tiger. And I thought that they kind of set that scene up well. And then they did some nice not showing the monster work. And that, did you guys enjoy that scene too?
Yeah, I like that too. And I also liked that, well, they also seemed semi-surprised that there was an actual tiger to some extent and that it was acting weird. But I liked how they had the hunters who were sort of like, all right, they're just there to sort of drive it and we're gonna, drive it to a certain place. And then once it was very clear, because it started attacking, that it was not acting like a normal tiger, sort of the elite guardsmen were like, okay, call him back and we'll take care of this at this point. But I liked the choreography of the scene. I liked the difference between the elite trained soldiers and the sort of like layman hunters. I liked the little noisemakers they had. I thought that was like a really interesting thing to show.
I loved how quickly everybody was ready to get out of there when he blew the horn. Like all the normal folks were like, okay, not sticking around for this. Let's just turn and sprint back through the forest, because that's exactly what I would have done the moment anyone gave me any cover to do so.
Yeah. And not just run, but screaming, run exactly. Screaming down the hill. No, that was great. And then you kind of get introduced to the Pagioe Jurchens as being these super badasses with their little knives and their lack of fear. And that scene, that kind of showdown in the field where Tiger gets his comeuppance, but not before taking out a few highly trained soldiers. But that also leads us to that scene where the Jurchens are just really unwilling to accept a tiger. Even that tiger has killed 16 of their buddies.
And we won't learn it right then, but that's when the kind of deal is forged that defines the rest of Ashin's life, right? Because they basically trade, they blame the settlement village and kind of trade that for kind of life for the folks who the ginseng hunters who died.
Yeah, and I know that they set it up in the introductory crawl of 10,000 Jurchens can't be beat sort of stuff, but it does feel like Chi-Rock, the guy who makes that deal, the commander of the Joseon forces, is in a real hurry to not get into a fight with these Jurchens. He's willing to throw away an entire village, but of course they're not Joseon. So yeah, maybe the arithmetic makes sense, but the show does a good job of making him seem noble and upstanding, because he stands up to Byam Il earlier on when he's like, you killed those Jurchens, you big jerk. And is like, this is a warning, don't do it again. But then when push comes to shove, he is all too eager to sell out Ashin's whole village.
Right. And then I did love, especially, it was a slow burn in the beginning. But then it finally, like when it starts like really moving, and when we see Ashin, we've seen her trained, we've seen some of the things that she has gone through, including like sexual assault and all sorts of things to basically, she's serving as a spy in order to get vengeance for her father, and she thinks that she's being helped to do this. But then I thought that they did a great job at turning the story on its head when she, discovers that, first of all, her father is unfortunately still alive and has been tortured all these years. But then her plan to just basically, well, the vengeance is hers basically, and just taking like all of those scenes and just showing how this all unfolds, I thought was just excellent in terms of the cinematography, and then of course the big reveal at the end, which I don't know, do we want to spoil that for people?
Well,
But this
that's what
also
we do.
gives, I mean, we're gonna spoil it. We're gonna spoil it for all of you. Don't listen to the end of this right now. If you,
HA, I don't know if you recognized him, but the chief of the Jurchen army, Adagon, I think is his name, his character's name. He is played by an actor who I thought was quite familiar looking. It turns out I know why. Dude's name is Ku Kyo Hwan, and he was in another Korean zombie movie that we've seen recently, which was Peninsula: Train to Busan. He played. I mean, in this movie, he doesn't have any dialogue. He just kind of looks at people in a way that is very piercing, and I think he's going to probably come into play in season 3. But in Peninsula, this gentleman was Captain SEO or SEO. He was the dude who wore the blazers in the zombie apocalypse and was sort of in charge of that crew of roughnecks.
well, in this case, he also has his own little costume with his hood and whatever. He looks very cool though. But
nice to see him again.
I do think that just showing the action and showing her interaction with the guards, and I also thought that the use of flashbacks was really well done. As when they intersperse it, especially at the end, and the film editing was really just great storytelling overall. But she is beyond badass in terms of like her training, and it's like, I mean, they did a bit of the training montage when we see her more from like child to adult, but then we see her skill and her spycraft basically, as the movie continues, and it's really just this fantastic, just revenge story, classic revenge story.
Yeah.
And it's very satisfying to watch.
It's satisfying, but it's also just like so devastatingly sad.
Oh,
I
of
mean,
course.
as a child, she's kind of arguing with her father and basically saying like, "Hey, can't we go live with the Jurchen on the other side of the forest? They're kind of our people." And he's very much like kind of has this loyalty to the Josens. And then I think, for those many years while she's kind of living amongst the Joshins, she's got this whole like idea in her head that, the Jurchens murdered her village and her father, and so now she's with the people who kind of at least semi have her back, and that's her kind of conversation with the commander where she's like, avenge my loss basically. And then over the course of the story she finds out that actually both sides have just equally betrayed her and her people, and that they've actually been kind of this like landless like people this whole time. And the scene where she finds her father is just so sad. He's like begging for death. He's been mutilated. He's been tortured. And
Mhm.
I really get the sense that that's when like whatever fragile like little tie to sanity just totally snapped within
Yeah.
her. And it's such an interesting story because she's so relatable and you can kind of empathize so deeply with her, and yet she's totally insane and responsible for all of the carnage and events of the subsequent seasons. So it's just it's a great origin story because it makes you root so deeply for this person who is like actually deeply broken.
I get very strong Anakin vibes from her finding her dad in the tent, and then she kills him, but then he is killed or dies like Anakin's mom, and then she turns to the dark side. It's like it is pretty much, it's right there, but she doesn't really even have the proof that the Josens did this yet at this point. But she goes back to the camp. She sees them leaving. Like She-Rock and the other soldiers going south to help the war effort, I guess against the Japanese maybe. But one of her first acts when she goes back into the fortress is to murder one of the Joseon guards. Like she actually has already kind of tipped over before she gets the proof that She-Rock sold her dad out, which I thought was kind of interesting too. But like you're saying, Kyle, like this trauma of finding her dad, doing the thing she has to do after everything she's been through. And honestly, I feel like the rape element of this story is really bleak, and it does not, I don't think, get enough. In a way, it doesn't get treated as seriously as it should. No,
it definitely doesn't. But I also think that was, probably the reality. Weirdly, like I don't think that the captain would have said anything to the guy doing that to her. But
I think he only said something because he needed a favor from her right at that moment.
Right. But the other thing I will point out is that she was already kind of tipped over the edge, as we find out, had been tipped over the edge since she saw, and understandably, since she went through the whole traumatic seeing like all of the people of her village, her entire family, all dead. So she's been harboring a pretty like messed up secret for years. And as I said, I thought that this storytelling, and it's bleak, there's no doubt that it's bleak and devastating, but this is also just really well done in terms of a vengeance tale. But then at the watching how she kind of deals with all of the turned soldiers and things like that, and she's really not it makes so much sense later when you see what experience she has, but it's sort of like she is really nonplussed with this whole village going crazy. She is very much in control, even though she is tipped over the edge. I would say it's controlled chaos to some extent, but she has no fear. She's got nothing left to lose, basically, after she had to do what she did, which was unspeakable to her dad. And then, the sort of end game in this, I thought, was just pretty incredible, because you think it doesn't get more twisted, and then we see what she's been basically keeping
since she was like 11 or whatever.
Yeah. So think about that, because I mean, she had to basically, and this is the big spoiler we were referring to earlier, but basically she turned her entire village into walkers with the plant, and has been keeping them all chained up and feeding them all of these years. And she's got this weird little crazy narrative. So I think she definitely tipped over into the realm of even more crazy, but I would venture to say that she's been kind of crazy all this time.
Yeah.
But focused. So.
I thought that was pretty bonkers of a twist for the end. And also the fact that she's the one who gives the flower to Dr. Lee at the very, very end. And then she's shooting an arrow at Idagon. And I'm not sure where that's going to go, but I assume season 3 is going to have to deal with that arrow. As it doesn't feel like a smart move on her part.
No.
So
I would say they were very accommodating of her in that moment, because it was really very dramatic of them to just all stand there motionless while she draws, knocks, and shoots an arrow. I was like, you guys could easily be moving, shooting back, like doing anything right now. Yeah. Strong, I guess that's Walking Dead season 2 vibes from the zombies in the hut. Wasn't that
in the barn?
A major subplot of season 2 was that they had all their loved ones in the barn that they were hoping to someday turn back.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah,
I thought the same thing, Kyle. Only better done, I thought.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess it makes sense, but I'm kind of like, man, that's a long time to keep all these walkers secret up there in the forest. Like, you would think somebody would come through looking for scavenging or something. Maybe they did, and they got eaten, or people thought they were nuts or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch to think that this little girl could have turned the entire village and had all this chain and was, yeah. But I'm willing to go along with it because Ashin then is just insane badass villain, and I do love this story for being a villain origin. And I'm kind of excited to see her build on that legend in the next season.
We've talked about the chaos of the final kind of massacre of the soldier camp with everybody turning and um, kind of falling upon each other, and then the person kind of looking down on that is Ashton up on the rooftop with her arrows, just kind of calmly, either taking out survivors or taking out zombies that get too close, and then in the end, kind of igniting this pyre. And she just looks so totally focused and in control and badass. She's never in any danger the entire time. You get the sense that all this is playing out exactly how she pictured it, and it is extremely satisfying to see these folks all meet their comeuppance.
Wow.
So I highly recommend this to anybody who's watched Kingdom, but even if you haven't, I agree that I think you could watch it separately and there would be no issue with it, but might encourage you to watch the other 2 seasons. And I think I have to rewatch season 2 before they go any further into this story. So, but nice having you on the podcast today, Kyle. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for listening. And next time we'll be discussing Blood Red Sky. If you have any thoughts on Ashen of the North, please leave us a note at reanimatedpodcast.com. You can tweet at us, reanimatedpcast, or send us an email, reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, ciao.
Thank you. Bye.